All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming here. Everyone having a good Ignite so far? Awesome. Good to hear it. So got a lot to cover today, so I might go a little bit quick, but today I'll be talking about Office UI Fabric and specifically a little bit behind the scenes, kind of how the project has kind of evolved and used within Microsoft. So my name is Peter John. I'm a senior UX engineering manager in the OneDrive and SharePoint design studio. And by day, I run a team of kind of front-end developers that help make OneDrive and SharePoint beautiful and performant across web and mobile devices. But by night, this team kind of helps build Office UI Fabric, helps make it great, and that's what I want to talk a little bit more about today. So before we dive in, should do some quick framing. What exactly is Office UI Fabric? Now, who here has heard about Fabric before? A couple hands. Cool, all right, so pretty familiar audience, awesome. So what you might know is that Fabric is the official front-end framework to build experiences for Office that fit seamlessly into Office and Office 365. So if you're a platform developer, you would use Fabric to help your experiences look and feel native to Office. But what you might not know is that behind the scenes, it's also a design and engineering framework that we use within Microsoft to build coherent experiences across the company. And so I want to set up a little bit of an agenda for what we're going through today. If I'm doing my job right, when you leave here, you'll know more about what Office UI Fabric is, how it kind of came about within the company, and what it includes. We'll also talk about how an open source approach through Fabric to designing and building products is changing how we within Microsoft are really building Office and beyond. And I'll also be talking about the new Fabric Design Toolkit and how it can be used to design your own experiences using Fabric and Fabric React. And some of the kind of key takeaways from this, as we go through these slides, I want you to really take away the idea that Fabric is the real stuff. This is what we actually use within Microsoft to build Office, Visual Studio, Team Services, and other products. We're actually collaborating to build Fabric and these products together. And that Fabric is really the key to enabling your own extensions within Office to look and feel native. And finally, that for the most part, almost all of the Fabric projects are open source by default, so you can contribute to any of them at any time. And before we dive into Fabric specifically, I want to give a little bit of a framing about how it fits into the broader Office 365 developer platform story. And so if you've been to any of the other kind of Office Dev Track sessions this week, you've probably seen some variation of this slide. So I don't want to spend a ton of time here. But for those who haven't, this slide is basically how we think of the platform for Office. And so the top part really represents two ideas. The first is that you can create apps and products that extend Office 365, which we'll call extensions. These are things like add-ins or pages or conversations like a Yammer or Outlook post. And the second idea is that Office 365 can actually extend your own products and apps with the power of the O365 platform. And so these are standalone apps that you might build that connect to the Office 365 platform and powers the intelligence of the platform. And both of these kind of ideas can be powered by the graph, which is a single REST-based API endpoint that you can connect all of these apps and services to really tap into the intelligence of the Office platform and pull data and information from your own company. Now, with that in mind, this talk is really going to be focused on Fabric, which you should really think about as the skin or the view layer for these apps to help them look and feel native to Office. Cool, so now that we've kind of framed how Fabric fits into the broader Office developer platform, I want to kind of lay out each of the audiences that Fabric really targets. So first, Fabric, if you've used it today, you might know that it's code for developers, manifested through projects like Fabric Core, Fabric React, and Fabric.js. But unbeknownst to many folks, it's also a set of tools and resources for designers that we make available through the Fabric Design Toolkit. You might think of this as the kind of spec sheet that we within Microsoft have been using to build Fabric. It's what we actually use to specify how Fabric should look and feel, and it's also what we'll use as the basis for designing our own products. And so I'll talk a little bit more about this later and give a little bit of a demo for how you can use this today. And finally, it's also a set of documentation for both designers and developers to help kind of bridge these roles and enable you to design and build Office experiences end to end. And so before we take a closer look at some of these projects, I want to share a little bit of the history of Fabric, since I know for some this might be a little bit opaque. You might not have known about how Fabric really came about to be where it is today. So I want to give a little bit of history into how it kind of evolved. So in the beginning, the kind of first bits of code that we would now call Fabric Core started in early 2014 during planning for what we call Office 15 or Office 2016. And at this time, there was a single design studio that was responsible for creating a kind of common design language for all of Office 365. And this included Exchange, SharePoint, and others. And the problem that this team faced was that they had a charter to build one design language for all of these teams. But each of these product teams were often using totally different engineering systems, right? Exchange kind of started using its own system. SharePoint had its own kind of framework. And there wasn't really a kind of cohesiveness around what JavaScript tools and technologies to use. And because of this, there weren't always great ways to share code between them. This was obviously a problem for designers that want this set of products to look and feel like part of a family, right? And so this posed to us, the studio, the question, how do we really bridge these roles? How do we bridge these product teams and help them feel like they're part of one Office suite? So the answer to this was a common set, like a common denominator set of atomic CSS and fonts that really represented the kind of foundational elements of a design language. Things like colors, icons, animations, as well as simple presentational JavaScript that would really represent the UI components, things like buttons, text fields, and drop-downs that we would use to build these apps out of. Not full-on prescribed controls. These are representational components. And so now, if we fast forward to about a year later, to the summer of 2015, we partnered with the Office 365 Dev Platform team to actually release Fabric open source on GitHub under the Office Dev organization. And this was something that many folks have been asking for quite some time. You know, we want to build add-ins and extensions that look and feel native to Office. Until this point, many folks had to kind of use their own. They had to kind of guess, steal the CSS from Exchange or steal the CSS from SharePoint. And so Fabric quickly rose in popularity to become the #1 GitHub repo on the Office Dev organization. And it also started kind of illustrating to us the beauty of working in open source transparently. We started getting contributions and pull requests from a bunch of folks, and there were even spin-off projects that kind of came out of this, such as the NG Office UI Fabric project that Andrew Connell kind of started, creating Angular directives for Fabric. And so at this point, you know, things are going pretty well. We release internally on GitHub. We're seeing many kind of internal audiences, even across the company, starting to adopt Fabric for their own projects. And then, if we fast forward to last summer, kind of mid-2016, something really awesome happened. Many product teams across the company, within Office and beyond, kind of started reevaluating the front-end tools and technologies that we use. Maybe we shouldn't be using our own internal JavaScript framework. Maybe we should consider consolidating. And what kind of happened was that many of these product teams independently converged on React.js, you know, Facebook's UI library. And so this kind of led to a collaboration and a question: why don't we build together full production-ready UI controls that are not just representational, full controls that are built on React and built on the Fabric brand? And so this led to the creation of the Fabric React project, which, you know, kind of steps on the shoulders of Fabric.js, which at the time was, again, just purely representational controls, and kind of quickly started becoming adopted across the company, both within Office and kind of beyond. And so that kind of brings us to today, where Fabric's kind of various projects are used broadly across not just Office, but increasingly Microsoft. And more than that, we're kind of seeing a strong kind of cross-company internal open source community for designers and engineers forming around the Fabric brand. And finally, as of today, also the design toolkit that I talked about earlier, with all of the resources such as fonts, branded assets, and other downloads are available for you to access and design your own experiences with as well. Cool. And so with that, I now want to dig in a little bit into Fabric Core and Fabric React before giving a kind of few demos for how these projects really show up within our products. So Fabric Core, like I mentioned, these are the kind of atomic styles, right, that I mentioned at the very beginning, the kind of foundational elements of the design language. So these include things like fonts and typography, colors, branded assets, such as the file type icons for Word, PowerPoint, Excel, animations, so that when you invoke a dialogue, you know that this is a dialogue that's popping up from the Office brand. A responsive grid, similar to what you might find in Bootstrap Foundation or other front-end tools. And utilities for localization. You know, many customers serve content to folks in right-to-left environments, and we have utilities that kind of allow you to target those. We might flip the responsive grid, or even serve up font stacks that will, for example, if you were viewing the content in China, will optimize the font stacks to kind of give a better experience for those readers. And like I said, this is available on GitHub, the Office UI Fabric Core project. Next is Fabric React. This is the project that came about last year. And this is the set of really robust UI controls built on React.js. And these are the ones that are, again, used across Microsoft and Office. So these include, you know, a variety of kind of controls, like the basics, right? Inputs, like buttons and text fields and drop-downs, pickers, like people pickers, date pickers, containers that can hold other content, other experiences, like callouts, dialogues, commanding and navigation, things like command bar, pivots, as well as utilities and controls specifically tuned for accessibility. This is, I think, one of the most kind of compelling aspects of Fabric. As you probably know, accessibility is an absolutely first-class citizen in terms of requirements that we need to support within our own products, and this manifests within Fabric extensively. And so we have utilities for example, trapping focus if you are tabbing within a dialogue, or allowing you to use really rich keyboard navigation so that you have tabbable regions that you can then arrow in between. Every control also has built-in ARIA labels where they make sense, and descriptions, and also provide hooks so that you can provide context from your application. And I'll demo some of these a little bit later as we dig in to the site. Okay. Again, this is also available on GitHub as well. And so now I've talked a lot already about how broadly Fabric is used across Microsoft's products today. I want to give a little bit of a visual overview so you can get a sense of really what I mean. So as you can see, Fabric is used pretty extensively by some of the biggest workloads within Office 365, including the O365 suite header, the black bar or the themable bar at the top, Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint Planner, OneNote, and more. But many of the controls and styles are also used to some degree by products that you may or may not actually expect to use them, such as Dynamics, Visual Team Services, who are actually rebuilding all of their web UI using Fabric, and even new members of the Microsoft family, like MileIQ. In addition to these products, there are more than 45 additional sites, products, and applications that are built using Fabric. And many of these are smaller teams that might not have a dedicated design team, or who might be under the pressure to ship really quickly and don't have time to fight the fight of defining what buttons should look like and how text fields should act. And so you can see that Fabric really helps a lot of these teams solve these common problems and move more quickly and feel more cohesive. And like I mentioned before, it's also used extensively by many, many developers today who are building apps and extensions for Office 365. Things like Office add-ins, SharePoint web parts, graph-connected apps, and more. And so now I want to give a little bit of a demo so that you can see exactly what I mean when I say that Fabric helps our experiences look and feel cohesive and consistent. So if I switch over to my demo machine here, so I first want to start with a quick overview of the Fabric website, which you can find at uifabric.io. And here, like I said, you can find documentation for getting started with Fabric React. and core, as well as guidance and best practices for how to use all of these in your own experiences. And so first I'm going to go over to styles, where you can see that we have guidance and documentation for all those kind of fundamental parts of the design language I mentioned earlier. Things like animations, right, which are just simple classes that you can add to an element to kind of invoke a style. The color palette I talked about before, this is the same color palette that many of our designers will use in designing their own apps. And in fact, a kind of a cool side note, one of the very first things that we do when we hire new designers to our team is point them to the Fabric website. This is actually the kind of first, a public website is the first thing that we actually introduce many of our designers to. And so you're seeing the same stuff that we use when we build our own experiences. And other tools such as iconography, which if you've used Windows before, you might recognize. These are the same set of icons from that team, customized for Office, and many more. And so now I'm going to go to the Components page, where if we look on the left nav here, we can view each of the Fabric React controls that I spoke to earlier. And so if I go to the contextual menu page here, and I scroll down, you can see that there's really rich design documentation for this control. Overview of how it's used, what it is, as well as do's and don'ts so that you know how to use them in context. Samples as well, so you can get a sense for how it looks and feels, and code samples so that you can use them in your own experiences as well. And so now, what I want you to take a note of as I kind of invoke each of these examples here is really the details of this contextual menu. Notice the animation for how it flies in, that little subtle animation, the little drop shadow behind it, the spacing around it. Really keep those in mind, because I'm now going to go over to Outlook and kind of show you how these are used. So now Outlook, like I'd said before, was one of the kind of first product teams to start using Fabric React. And in fact, the new Outlook experience that they launched earlier this summer is built almost entirely using Fabric React here. So we'll see that many of these controls on the page you can find directly from the Fabric website. This command bar up here, the personas around here used to represent people and groups, as well as even the list here. While this list is customized, it actually uses the same list that you would find on the Fabric site here, built on the same kind of virtualization technology. And so now, if I go and start composing a mail, maybe add a recipient or two. Notice also this is the same people picker you'd find on the website. If I go ahead and start customizing this mail, set some options for it, notice this contextual menu, notice the animation. This is the exact same context menu that you can find on the Fabric website. Pretty cool, huh? So now I want to jump over to my OneDrive account, where again, almost all of the UI here uses Fabric to some degree. And again, you'll notice the kind of same thing within Outlook. The same command bar here, persona here. Even the details list here is the same details list that you would find on the Fabric site. And if I were to go and take an action on this, on this folder here, you'll see that same exact contextual menu. And this is starting to send the cues to folks that, hey, these are all part of the same Office family, the same suite of products, right? And so, one thing I want to call out is that because SharePoint also uses Fabric, if I now go over to a SharePoint communication site, the Condoso Travel Innovation site, and I want to add a new page, we'll see, again, that same exact contextual menu in the same exact command bar showing up here. And so you can see that these controls really help our users understand that they're in a familiar context and reinforce that these experiences are all part of the same family of products. And I'll also point out, while I'm talking about SharePoint specifically, that Fabric React is actually included in the modern SharePoint framework. So it's available to you when you want to build web parts that look and feel like a native part of a SharePoint page. And to kind of wrap up the demos, I want to show a really kind of interesting one. Much of what I've kind of shown so far illustrates how Fabric can be used to kind of unify these products, make them look and feel like they're part of the same family, right? And this is absolutely a priority. But the styles can also be used and customized to kind of serve different visual product needs. And so to illustrate this, I want to give a quick demo of MileIQ, a product that helps users kind of log and track their mileage while driving. So mine, like you, joined the Microsoft family in 2015, and as you can see from this dashboard, has a pretty distinct visual style. But under the hood, much of what we see here is actually built using Fabric React. This is the same details list that I showed before on OneDrive, and that would show up in a SharePoint document library. The search box is the same one that you would see on the Fabric site. And if I were to go to add a drive record here, despite its totally different visual style, it's actually under the hood, again, the same dialogue that you might see if I were to start writing a mail in OA and discard it. It's the exact same code. And so finally, just to wrap it up, I also wanted to show a super quick demo of how Fabric can be used for the extensions that I mentioned earlier in the context of an Office add-in. And so if I open up a Word document here, you'll see that I've created an add-in on the right here that can help me quickly configure and assemble my documents. And because these add-ins are based on simple web technologies, I can just use the Fabric React controls wholesale and look and feel native to even the Word client. So if I flip over here to this menu, you'll see that same contextual menu showing up here, which would have the same kind of animation that you might see in one of the drop-downs in the ribbon, right? And so this is how you can use all the Fabric controls to kind of feel native even to Office. Now I'm going to switch back. And so as you can imagine, we've learned a lot from this kind of open source way of thinking. It's been a really big kind of culture shift for the company kind of adopting Fabric as a kind of open source project. I want to share some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. The first is the idea that thinking in terms of open source really evolves engagement, partnership, and empathy between disciplines and product teams. You know, Fabric has really gotten our designers and engineers internally talking to each other so much more than before, which reduces kind of redundancy between our products. Like I said, Outlook doesn't need to say, this is what our button should look like. No, this is what SharePoint's button should look like. We all have agreed that buttons should look like buttons. And second, because of that is the idea that this kind of open source adoption really accelerates bigger kind of product initiatives across the company. Because we're no longer kind of fighting over these little things, we're able to kind of tackle bigger problems and solve harder customer scenarios, such as how fluent the design language might show up within the context of Office. And third is the idea of really distributed accountability and how it empowers contributors. Fabric was really born out of a kind of shift of culture and not a kind of top-down strategy, and it's not owned by any kind of single organization. Every contributor is accountable for its success, and it reflects a kind of grassroots, open source kind of way of thinking. And finally, is the idea that even with this kind of distributed accountability, is the idea that some coordination and some centralization is still really important to kind of keep a high quality bar. And so internally, we have this idea of a kind of a core Fabric team that kind of sets kind of standards for pull requests and design contributions, such that even though hundreds of Microsoft engineers are kind of contributing to the project, we're maintaining a consistently high quality bar. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit more about the design system of Fabric, because again, this is kind of design community within Microsoft that's kind of cropped up around Fabric, and share some of the kind of exciting news as of this week, which is specifically the Adobe XD Toolkit. So first, I want to answer, what is the XD Toolkit? In a nutshell, the XD Toolkit is a set of tools and resources kind of for designing responsive experiences using Fabric styles and components that are built using Adobe Experience Design, which I'll refer to as XD from here on out. And so before I really demo this toolkit to you, I want to share some of the kind of goals that we had in mind when we set out to create this toolkit. First is that there should be a set of kind of centralized design resources that kind of help us all solve the same problems, aimed at improving product quality and efficiency. And these resources and assets should be constantly evolving and living. We don't want them to kind of fall behind. It's so easy to kind of come across resources that reflect design thinking from the previous quarter. And so these assets should be constantly up to date with the latest thinking, no matter where they come from. The toolkit should also be cross-platform via Adobe XD. So even though we're in a design studio using a lot of Macs, surprisingly, we have quite a few designers using Windows. And so the toolkit should be available to those folks as well. It should also embrace the open source way of thinking within Office and Microsoft. Unfortunately, because it is our design language, because it is our brand, we can't necessarily open source it, but we want to do as much as we can to move the needle there and make it as open source as possible. And finally, we want to make sure that third-party developers like you are enabled to kind of design integrations for Office so that they can look and feel native as well. Oh, wrong machine. And so I'll show you this really quickly, but what's included in the toolkit is the same design language that I talked about earlier. So these are the fundamental parts of Fabric Core and the React components. So these are things like colors, iconography, typography, UI components, including their kind of interactive states, responsive behaviors, as well as guidance for how to use them, flow templates, so that if you're building out a UI, you'll have a template for how those might look, as well as downloads and resources, such as Sego UI, the icon font, and branded assets. This is actually a pretty big deal. None of these have actually been made available to download and install before. And so as of this week, they're now available for you to install and use if you're designing extensions for Office 365. And so now I want to hop over to the demo machine again and give a really quick demo of how this works. So if I jump over to the toolkit here, we'll see that I have, again, these kind of set of sticker sheets, right? So this is the same set of icons that if you're familiar with Fabric, you now have access to design with them. There are also gestures, so if you're designing a mobile experience, you can get a sense of, you can tell your developer how they might pinch or zoom. There's also utilities for kind of creating accessibility specs, such as tab order, keyboard shortcuts. If we hop down here, we'll see again the kind of core elements of the design language, such as the colors, typography, branded assets, as well as these kind of sticker sheet specs for all of the UI controls. And again, I want to emphasize that these are the same kind of controls, the same specifications that we've been building Fabric off of for the last few years that we now make available for you to design your own experiences with. And so these run the range of all the controls that you saw on the left nav earlier. So let me zoom out really quick just so you can kind of get a sense for just how much content is really available here. Lots and lots of controls. And so now to kind of show you how you can apply this in context, I want to show you a little kind of add-in. I've done a little bit of homework before here, and I started kind of designing and building a to-do list app here. And you can see it's pretty simple, but already it kind of feels Office-y, right? I'm starting to use some of the typography from Fabric, the text box and button from Fabric, as well as checkboxes. But I want some way to add progress and to show, visually represent how progress might be achieved here, right? Like some way to tell the user you've completed so much, so many tasks. So what I might do is hop over to the toolkit, and I happen to know that there's a progress indicator control here. So I'm going to scroll down to the sticker sheets for that, grab that out, copy it, go back to my file here, paste it in, and we'll see that the program is already telling me how to kind of line it up. Because I want to make sure that my developer has no question around what strings to use here, I'm going to add in some text. 2 of 3 tasks completed. Make that fit. Customize this a little bit. 1 second. Make it kind of fit the container. Great. And just like that, we have now progress. So now what I'm going to do is hop over to my browser, where again, I've kind of started building out this app already. And so this is the kind of start of it. It's pretty cool. It kind of works. Going to add some tasks, blah, blah, blah. And it'll even kind of function as you might expect. But again, I don't have any way to kind of track progress. So if I hop over to the code down here and crack it open, this is the code for that. And we'll see there's not a whole lot of magic to this app, right? I'm importing some of the kind of fundamental Fabric components up here, defining the class for the component, put the app structure here, tracking the state through tasks up here, And here's my kind of main render function where I'm defining the main structure for the app, right? Here's that title that I showed you, the text input for the tasks, the task list, and a place for where progress should go. So if we go down to render progress, we'll see that it's just a string right now. Now, since I'm now the developer and my designer has handed over to me this awesome XD file that shows me exactly what I should use, I happen to know that I can go and get the code for this control from the Fabric website. So if I hop again over to the Fabric website, I know that there's a progress indicator there. So I'll go back to the progress indicator, scroll down, there we go, same one. So I'm going to grab some of the code from that, copy it out, paste it in, fix the spacing because it's going to annoy the heck out of me if I don't. And then give this a static value since I know that %complete doesn't actually exist in this project yet. Go ahead and save it. Oh, it's going to give me an error. I think it's because I need to add the progress indicator. I need to import it first. So we go ahead and import that. Hopefully it'll work. There we go. So now if I hop back to my browser, great. You'll see that I actually have a progress indicator. Now, it's not smart yet, so let's go ahead and add that. Again, I've done a little bit of homework just to make this quick. But what I've done is I've set up a couple of little snippets here that are basically just pulling in the number of kind of total tasks versus the number of completed tasks. So I'm just going to add those properties to my component. It's not going to work. Oh, I need to put it into curly braces. There we go. So now if I hop back, we'll see that if I add more tasks, there we go. The values at the bottom are now updating. Match the state. And so now if I want to have the progress indicator itself update, I wrote a little function here that just tells me the percentage of how many tasks I've completed. So I'll go ahead and put that in. So now if I go ahead and add more tasks, we'll see that the progress indicator now responds as you would expect. And so just like that, I was able to design and build end-to-end and experience using the Fabric Design Toolkit and Fabric React. Thank you. All right. And so with that in mind, I want to wrap up and say a call to action for all of you to go ahead and contribute to Fabric. File issues, give feedback. We really do listen and live out of GitHub. If not me, somebody from the Fabric project will be listening, and we love feedback from everyone. We also ask you to contribute directly. We welcome pull requests, and if you go and you add a pull request, there's a template that kind of shows like how you like the kind of standards for quality. And so call to action to kind of contribute there, including making the next NG Office UI Fabric. Like I said, much of our energy is focused right now on the Fabric React project. And so if there's a need for other projects, such as Vue or Angular 2, we welcome all of those and would support those. And I'd even like to advertise them on the website, frankly. And finally, I would recommend each of you to attend or view the content for any other related sessions here, which I'll list out in the next slide. If you also want to try out Fabric React and try building the task list that I just showed you now, you can also check out just down the hall in the immersion lab, HOL 3013, which will allow you to kind of get started quickly building with Fabric React. And finally, visit dev.office.com to kind of sign up for the developer bootcamp, as well as the virtual hackathon, which I think just opened up this week and will be running throughout December. Cool. And so these are some of the other sessions that you might want to check out that kind of cover the range from how the graph and Fabric kind of can be used together. 2062, which is all about Office add-ins. Roberto was running that one, and how to kind of extend Office using both the ribbon and add-ins. You can also check out 2393 for what's new and what's coming for branding and organizing SharePoint sites. And actually happening right now, you'll want to check out the slides for this, is 2241, which is all about how to make SharePoint sites accessible and inclusive. And again, just as a reminder, please evaluate the session. We totally appreciate all of the input, and we'll incorporate that into everything that we do next year. And so with that in mind, I think we got a fair bit of time if we have any other questions. All right.
Yeah, I have a question real quick, just about maintenance going forward. How easy is it if design changes and rounded corners come back or drop shadows or something like that? If somebody has built an add-in for like SharePoint Online, and then SharePoint Online updates very frequently, and eventually, a year or two, everybody's got rounded corners. Does your add-in automatically get updated with rounded corners, or what? How does that work?
Yeah, that's the ideal, right? The dream would be that if you are using Fabric and you're kind of maintaining it, going with each evolution, those design updates would be included. Now, we also want to make sure that we're balancing the updates that you would want with updates that you would not expect, right? Like another kind of core tenet of the SharePoint framework is making add-ins that are resilient, right? So you want to make sure that if you build a web part now, it will continue to run as you would expect for the next 10 years. And so what I'd say is that we are investigating mechanisms to allow really both scenarios. So you should be able to specify, yes, keep this evergreen, keep this fresh and using the latest, we'll be maintaining it. And there are also going to be ways that you can kind of keep it locked to a version so that there won't be any other styles bleeding in that you wouldn't expect.
That makes sense. That's really good, because some of the things are more complicated, like a progress bar might turn into a circle. And it's like, well, we don't want a circle ever. We just always want a line. So,
yep,
very good.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Hi, first of all, thanks for open sourcing great toolkit. It's pretty amazing. My question, I have two packed in one. Can you walk us through the thought process about choosing React over other libraries?
Sure.
And another side of that is maybe you can share some best practices, how you navigated the legal aspects prior to MIT. So it's a moot point right now, but just wondering, because we failed at navigation, legal aspect, we got prohibited in a company using React. Just curious, kind of historically, how you guys pulled that off.
Sure. So for the first question around why React, like I said, it was kind of something that happened a little bit organically across several different product teams, right? And what we kind of started to see from all these teams was this desire to have a more kind of composable, swappable kind of architecture. The problem with frameworks like Angular, right? It's great. It solves every problem for you. But at the scale that many of these product teams had been developing at, you need to build kind of some of your own infrastructure to enable certain scenarios. And so React allowed it's performant, it's composable, and it just concerns itself with the UI, not about data flow. And so this allows all these different teams to really architect their entire stack. That was one part of it. The other part of it, frankly, was pragmatism. The fact that for the first time, certainly since I've been at the company, and from what I hear, many years before, all these product teams had never actually agreed, we're going to use the same framework. And so there's a part of it that's just around, let's agree to use the same thing, stop fighting about technologies, and move on to solving harder problems. So those are the kind of two main things. There's many other kind of nuanced reasons. I could probably give you the Excel spreadsheet that we use to evaluate the features and performance tests, but those are the kind of high levels. Navigating the legal aspect is an interesting one. I might take this a little offline just because it can be a little bit wordy, but the gist of it is that every organization, every kind of team had to kind of wrestle with that. I wasn't personally involved in a lot of those discussions, but it did kind of have to go all the way up the chain to get approval from some folks that are quite a bit above my pay scale to make sure we're cool with this. We've talked with Facebook, and You know, I hate to say it, I actually am not as informed on that specific subject. I'm happy to follow up on that, though, and get some more information.
Thank you.
Cool.
So I had asked this, I think, last year at Ignite, and I'm just curious if there's been any follow-up. Have you guys had any more interaction with the Power BI team to see if any of those charts and graphs could make their way into the React or the Office UI fabric?
We are talking with them.
Sweet.
There's some of our there's some of our more recent partners, and yeah, they absolutely would love to do that. Like
Awesome.
we can't commit to a timeline, but what we're seeing is many of these organizations across the company, they take time, right? It's many of these products are built using other frameworks, and the idea of transitioning over to using one kind of new framework is pretty daunting and scary. And so Power BI is one of a set of groups that recently kind of onboarded and said, yeah, we'll be switching to Fabric, which means contributing back as well.
Awesome.
So again, I'm not on that team and can't commit to specifics around when or if those might come in, but it's come up many times. Within the SharePoint and OneDrive team, we have analytics and charting that we would love to leverage for those. So
Sure.
Between you and me, I'd like to see that happen. So I'll be fighting for that too.
Awesome. Thanks.
So, anything else? Oh, could you actually go through the mic just so it's, thanks.
Any plans migrating to React 16?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
As soon as possible. Yeah, I was just checking mail this morning, and many of our engineering teams are investigating what it might take. Because it's API compatible, it shouldn't actually be that big of a deal. The challenge will be among our product teams, making sure that they have done the work to upgrade and migrate, make sure there are no regressions there. But within Fabric, absolutely. I mean, MIT, right?
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
So I see Microsoft is embracing progressive web apps. And what are your reactions to that? And how do you think Fabric UI could potentially benefit now that we're moving more into a web-based apps development in general?
I have to be totally honest, I personally don't have a very nuanced perspective on progressive web apps. I'd love to maybe chat more about like what you kind of mean and what you might expect out of that. I would think that we would want to do as much as we can to enable PWAs more. I know that I'm not sure how relevant this exactly is, but enabling SSR scenarios like server-side rendering, which I believe is a big part of that, is definitely one of our main goals. And so any others, I'd love to, if you have suggestions, I'd love to know more. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.